let's return to that big story. Ethiopia is set to join Ghana and Zambia to become the latest African sovereign to default on its foreign commercial debt. A few weeks ago, Kenya was bailed out by the IMF on its Eurobond payments due June 2024, while Somalia got an IMF debt relief, and the Washington-based institution says it stands ready for another support to Egypt as the country goes into an election. Discussing all of this and more with me now in our 2023 review. Takeoff is Kelvin Emmanuel. He's an economist and a member of the board at Obsidian Channel Nigeria, which is a financial services firm headquartered in Ghana. Thanks for making it live here tonight.
Thank you so much.
We've got a whole lot of this coming through, and we think we need to speak to this as we get to the end of the year. Way back, if you look at 2021, it was Zambia with all the good news and backslapping that we've got the DSS framework by the IMF done, just as we were still around the COVID-19 pandemic. And 3 years on, since January 2021 to date, and we're heading into another January, Zambia is yet to get that debt relief. There's no light at the end of the tunnel for this country in Southern Africa. So the question is, do you think this IMF debt framework, do you think it's really working?
I don't think it's working, and I don't think that these frontier markets in Africa, the reason why Moody's, for example, came out with this report on the banking sector and talked about the external financing risk of frontier markets in Africa, and then Fitch has also come out with his debt rating framework of CCC, which is equivalent to CA1 for Moody's, and that talks about the risk for issuer default rating on foreign currency issuer debts. And when you look at Ethiopia, for example, you realize that early on this year, the National Bank of Ethiopia and the Central Bank of Nigeria, for example, went into an agreement to approve for the exchange of $100 million between Dangote Cement Ethiopia and Ethiopian Airlines. So Ethiopian Airlines has about $180 million stock in Nigeria for international airlines, and Dangote has about $280 million stock in Ethiopia for remittances back to Nigeria. And they went into a switch where $100 million worth of bear in Ethiopia will be exchanged for $100 million worth of naira for Ethiopian Airlines in Nigeria. Sorry, for Dangote Cement in Nigeria. And it still has about $180 million exposure. You see that the war in Tigray impacted Ethiopia. Yes, because several factories were destroyed, and about $250 million worth of exports from those factories also went up in smoke. So you have two factors that is leading to the situation you have in Ethiopia currently: the Tigray war and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the supply chain of Ethiopia. So, for example, the $1 billion in Eurobond payments they have maturing December 2024 that they have coupons to pay for today, Monday, the 11th of December 2023, is in default, is a technical default.
It's just $33 million, my friend. So
it's mind-boggling and it's troubling that a country like Ethiopia is having difficulties. The representative of the Minister of Fiscal and Economic Responsibility in Ethiopia issued a statement earlier today where he said that as at this moment, the government cannot pay $33 million in coupons to the Eurobond creditors. It's disturbing, and it's the same story we've had with Zambia. But however, the story in Zambia is that the new president, Hichilema, showed austerity in action. And that encouraged,
over the last 2 years.
It showed austerity in terms of cutting the size of government. For example, we've all seen in the last few days how just sworn-in president of Argentina, Milei, announced an executive order to reduce the number of government MDAs from over 20 to 9. And he intends to send a bill to parliament to pass it. And then you begin to come back to Nigeria to see the fact that the size of government is bloated, for example. And
the new government.
The new government is bloated. And the Stephen Orazeni report, for example, has been on the desk of several presidents since 2011.
And no one has
no one has bothered to implement it, because in Nigeria, we always put political considerations over the stability of the economy.
My point, and we're going to come to Nigeria within the time we have, but again, do you think, how bad is the fiscal position of nearly all major frontier African economies, by the way, right now?
The situation...
Because again, you've got debt, then you've got currency issue, which is another major serious whammy for this year.
Ghana, for example, has $54 billion in debt. The CD has dropped about 70%. The Ethiopian bear has dropped 40%. Inflation is running the parade because as your debt widens from the fact that your inflation to interest yield curve is going up to align in your fiscal tightening, monetary tightening, the cost of repaying back existing debt goes up, right? So for example, in Nigeria you have, I know you said we're going to come to Nigeria, but for the domestic debt, you have 86.8% for FGN bonds and 9% for treasury bills. And for the 3 months ending April, May, and June, the debt servicing was 565 billion naira. For 3 months. Your external debt, for 3 months, your debt servicing is $368 million. So the situation is bad because the question you have to ask yourself is that, considering Nigeria, for example, has $1.2 billion in Euro bonds coupon payments in 2024 in terms of service and then refinancing of maturing principal, you begin to ask yourself, with our exchange rate situation, where are we going?
At official speaking, I said, we did a whole bit better today, from 1,099 on Friday to about 864 today. But again, if you double down on Nigeria, you talk about the country's debt outlook based on where we are. And I'm wondering, the fiscal position across Africa, major economies, so bad at this point that we've got the currency issues to deal with, we have the debt to deal with, we have inflation to deal with at the same time. Do we still keep blaming all of this on COVID-19 pandemic?
We can't blame it on COVID-19 pandemic. And as the government does not have any excuses, because let me tell you what the reality is. The reality is that today Nigeria owes $43.1 billion in external debt. Okay? In 1999, when OBJ took over from Abdul Salam, Nigeria had $28 billion in debt. By 2005, 2006, that debt had come to $2 billion. And we've gone back from $2 billion in 2006, we've gone back to $43.1 billion. Now, of this, you have 48% to multilateral development banks, like the World Banks, the IFC, the African Development Banks. You have 36% to Eurobonds, which we have $1.2 billion in terms of servicing and refinancing costs in 2024. And then you have about 12% to bilateral partners. So even if you go to your bilateral partners like India, Germany, and China, for example, and we saw what happened with China last year when the Nigerian government went to borrow money from the Chinese Exim Bank for the medium-term expenditure framework 2017 to 2022, and China rejected. And in 2024 Appropriation Act, for example, the president has proposed to borrow 7.8 trillion naira, and you have a debt servicing to capital expenditure of 94.8%, which is very troubling.
For a number of African countries, the IMF is saying, look, you need to cut it down to about 53, 50 thereabout with Ghana. I'm just asking, do you think this World Bank, IMF packages are workable for Africa, not only for Nigeria? Do you think the solutions they bring?
I like what the new president of Argentina told the media. There's no money. Nigeria is borrowing to spend. The government is borrowing to spend money. So, for example, there are two major areas that is driving inflation in Nigeria, and it has made food inflation come up to 31.1%. That is making the IMF, for example, ask the CBN to raise interest rates. I don't advise them to raise interest rates because interest rate hike is not doing the job, right? Two major areas, energy and food. We're making progress with energy, doing backward integration for energy.
How do you think we're going to resolve that? Because we've closed 2 monetary policy meetings. So the last we had was with Folashadu, and now we don't know what is going to happen at the next one.
Well, the
IMF says we should raise rates. That was what
the IMF said we should raise rates, but the real question about how to bring inflation down goes back to your energy basket that is made up of 8 different products that cost $85 million on a daily basis. It also goes back to food. And then the question you have to ask yourself is, as this new president, with his Minister of Agriculture and Minister of Gas and Petroleum, because gas, petroleum, and agriculture is closely interrelated in terms of doing backward integration and securing your food basket. Have they shown you a practical plan that is implementable on how they intend to do backward integration, mix with imports, to bring food inflation back from 31% to around 20% within the next 2 years.
If we use monetary policy tools such as taking down the number of the chunk of currency in circulation, maybe that will help.
Well, one of the reasons, for example, why you're seeing some scarcity of the naira through treasury bills, one of the reasons is because the CBN is adopting the strategy of mopping up excess liquidity in the system through open money market operations.
So bring your big deposits, there will be no charges.
That alone is not effective. You need structural buffers to be able to, pull inflation back and reduce the need to hike interest rates and because what you have basically is that you have a situation, for example, where companies are having to depend on, do we use what we have in terms of retained earnings to invest and expand? Do we keep it and wait to see what is going to happen? Or do we go to development financial institutions to borrow money in USD? But then if you go to DFIs and you have to do deployment of capital through CCIs, what is the exchange rates forward guidance? Yeah. It's here at 1,100 today. It's there at 1,002 tomorrow. It's down to 950. There is no forward guidance on three major things: inflation, interest rate, and exchange rate, that will help businesses to be able to plan, to produce, to help them to be able to curb back the inflation you're seeing.
So technically, you think we're just moving on a daily basis as the day goes by, hoping that somehow things will work out? Like throw the dart on the wall, hoping that at least one will stick.
For a country like Nigeria, hope is not a strategy.
But hope is never a strategy for any country.
For food, I have been very disappointed because we've been so used to this smallholder farming model through direct intervention. For example, the CBN has just announced today that it has seized applications for all direct intervention programs, and it's also asked the banks to act as recovery agents for the existing loans for direct intervention programs that are currently impaired.
Yes.
Right? We need to move to commercialization of food production. Food production needs to enter the national security basket.
Another conversation, and you're stepping into another conversation we have, because we need to wrap this up. Because sometimes I wonder, is our agricultural policy for the rural farmers or for the urban farmers? I'm trying to understand what exactly it is, because what type of agri policies we're trying to run. But I've got to let you go at this point, discussing this debt issue. I'm sure there will be moments still in the days before the year runs out and into the new year to learn more from you and tap into your insight and perspective. Thank you so much, Kelvin Emmanuel.
Thanks for having me.
Economist and who is a board member at Obesida and Achana, Nigeria.